there's a bigger picture way to test the systemic racism hypothesis, which is to take two populations where it's a very messy, crude science experiment, but to take two populations where you're holding systemic racism constant, namely black Americans like myself and black immigrants, especially black immigrants from the West Indies and their children. So we're talking about immigrants from Jamaica, Barbados, other places in the West Indies, and specifically their children, their American-born children. So these are people you could not tell apart from black, like you couldn't tell if I didn't tell you that I wasn't the child of a Jamaican immigrant or something, right? And you find, the thing about these is that these two populations differ in many ways. Some ways are very hard to quantify, but they differ culturally. They differ for all kinds of reasons, partially because the kind of immigrant who gets out of a Jamaica differs systematically. It's going to be disproportionately intelligent, disproportionately hardworking. Whatever the traits are that get you from Jamaica to New York, say, that's a cluster of attributes that makes that population differ. But there's one thing that is not different, which is they are subjected to whatever level of systemic racism exists. So Thomas Sowell has done good work on, back in the 70s, he showed that second-generation West Indians living in the same city as black Americans were earning 58% more, right? So they're both being treated to whatever degree badly by white people. Whatever system you want to suppose is holding black people back is equally affecting both of them. The Columbia sociologist Van Tran has a great essay in which this difference is brought out. You find neighborhoods of black Americans right next to neighborhoods of black West Indians in New York. They're equally segregated from white people, so it gets rid of the idea that being segregated by itself or living around people who only look like you is inherently a disadvantage. It gets around the policing issue because these populations are being the police can't tell the difference between a second-generation West Indian and a black person. It gets around whatever level of systemic racism is or isn't in the pipeline with regard to schools. And you find wildly different outcomes. You find, rate of high school graduation much higher for black West Indians. Rate of enrollment in college much higher. Rate of professional occupations much higher. Crime lower, right? So this suggests to me that there are that the role of systemic racism, to whatever degree it exists, is minimal at this point. And there's a whole narrative built around the idea that this is the primary obstacle facing black people. And it's worth noting, I don't think most black people actually believe this, because there are various polls to cite here, but there's one from Pew that asked black people without college educations, has your race held you back at all in life? 60% said no. It's a recent Pew poll. Another Gallup poll asked, is bias the main issue facing you in jobs and housing? 60% again said no. The Harvard sociologist Ethan Foss has done extensive polling of the black community and found that disconnected black youth, which are black youth who aren't in schools and don't have jobs, the people on the lowest rung of society, something around 30% of them think the system is rigged and 70% don't. So what we're getting is we're getting the voices of black people who believe the systemic racism narrative promoted to the most powerful media positions in our country. So we're getting the impression that this is a uniform view, and it's not.
Right, so this is sort of the Jesse Jacksons, Al Sharptons, they get moved up because they're given sort of simple answers.
Right.
So I guess it harkens the question then, I could ask this either way, what is it that the West Indian immigrants are doing right, or what is it that the other folks are doing wrong?
Yeah.
You can answer that in either direction you want to go first.
Well, part of it is just immigration selection factors that I mentioned, right? So the kind of Jamaican or Barbadian who makes it off the island to New York is likely to be disproportionately hardworking, disproportionately X for whatever X factor is. And so in that sense, the direct comparison can be misleading, but just analyzing why these two populations differ, you find West Indian immigrants more likely to come from a two-parent home, more likely to have had a more classically socially conservative upbringing, which is, you don't talk back to your parents. Parents are rather strict. There are downsides, of course, to that style of parenting, but basically what I'm saying is that there are cultural factors that are important that differ between these two groups, right? You find there are many. I mean, this is where the conversation for many people gets especially uncomfortable, right? It's the idea that every culture, every subculture is identical in the behavioral patterns that are inculcated, and wherever there is a disparity in some outcome, it's not possible that culture accounts for some or most of that disparity, which I think is a very silly idea.
Well, it's completely nonsensical.
Yeah, yes.
Cultures are different. Different people and different groups put different emphasis on certain things. Some put more on family, some put more on education, some put more on sports, or whatever the hell it is. So when you hear Larry Elder make the argument, something around until 1972, the black family had a higher rate of staying in marriages, and then he lays out the reasons that he believes policies of the Democrats destroyed all that. That obviously resonates with you, right? Because you're giving me some piece of this. Both answers, I think, resonate or went back to family rates of marriage and some sort of conservative ideals.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, that's a very complex.
People
question.
hate when anyone talks about this, about family. People just absolutely hate it.
It is a fact that the rate of two-parent homes and marriages was pretty similar to the white rate until the 60s. It's a matter of scholarly dispute as to what was the cause. I think it's certain at this point there was no one cause. Welfare state may have had something to do with it, but I think it may have just been changing norms in the culture, because we're seeing the same thing happen in the white working class as well now, with the decline of two-parent homes to a lesser extent than has happened in the black community. So I guess So I mean, we could talk about some of the most important behavioral patterns that are different between black families and white families and Asian families. I mean, there are some statistics that I don't see any way in which this could possibly be explained by systemic racism. For example, one is that if you ask 13-year-olds if they've had their first sexual experience yet, you get 9% of whites saying yes. You get 21% of black people saying yes, right? So it's more than a twofold difference there. And that has everything to do with family dynamics, with there not being two parents in the home. It is a development issue more than it is an issue of treatment by white people, right? I have another piece in Quillette called Black American Culture and the Racial Wealth Gap, where I talk about spending differences. And Nielsen, the marketing firm, has done research on this, found that the average black woman is more likely to own a luxury vehicle than the average white woman, despite the fact that the average black family has 1/10 the wealth of the average white family. Spending patterns on jewelry and expensive clothes are very different in the black community. Whatever you want to say about these from an ethical, this is not, I mean, I'm not.
Right, I know you're not making an ethical judgment.
Right, I mean, I'm not finger wagging at people saying do X, don't do Y. I'm saying there are entire books written by respected left-wing scholars about issues like wealth or income or that just don't mention a single one of these facts, as if it's not relevant, right?